Hi everybody, welcome to Sprague Woodturning. My name is Jim. If you haven't been here before, this is predominantly a turning channel where I teach people how to make pieces on the lathe, either natural wood, epoxy, or natural inlay materials. This week we got something that's going to be a little weird. I've got a piece of walnut that's seen a lot better days, and we're going to cast that with an epoxy that's not meant for deep casting. So what that's going to give us is lots of thermal cracking, and then we'll be able to use the kintsugi method of repairing pottery, but in this case we're going to be repairing epoxy pieces. So let's get over to the bench. I'll show you the piece of wood that we're going to cast, and anyway, we'll go from there. All right, well, here is our piece of walnut that we're going to use, and yeah, it probably wouldn't even make good firewood, to be quite honest with you. So what we're going to do here is, this has been anchor sealed on both sides, so I'm going to trim that off on each side. We're going to be using a large 5-gallon bucket. This one's from Canadian Tire, and just trim this up so it fits in the bucket. Now this epoxy, October 22 is how old this epoxy is. And if you look at B's not yellowed all that much, so that's pretty impressive. But you know, it's been sitting around too long, and it's, you know, you should use it up before it expires. But I never really did get around to it, and I wasn't doing a whole lot of top coat finish stuff at that time, so that's why it's been around the workshop. But anyway, when we use this in a deep casting sense, it's going to give us lots of thermal cracking, or anyway, that's the hope. And if it doesn't, well, we'll just take a hammer to it till we get as much thermal cracking as we want. So first things first, let's go over and trim this on the bandsaw, clean this off and make it fit our bucket, and then we can mix up some resin. So thanks for stopping in to watch this week's video. Again, it is very important to make sure that pieces that you're going to cut on the bandsaw cannot rotate, because that is very dangerous. You'll also notice that the guides on the bandsaw are as low as I can get them. And as far as rounding this piece is concerned, I figured that it was probably best to just stick on a template for the bucket instead of trying to get out my circle cutting jig. And like I've said in the past, it's important to remove the bark before casting. The bark was loose in some areas here. I do have a piece coming up where I'm working with branches, and you know, it's on there, so I'm not worried about it coming off. But in this case, there were some loose areas, so it's important to get rid of that. So, you know, set yourself up for success instead of failure. I've seen people do castings with the bark, and then unfortunately it failed because the bark delaminated from the wood. And the last thing is to clean up the inner bark areas here with a brass coated brush. This is a steel brush. This was pointed out to me in the comments. Yes, I realize this is a steel brush. I still refer to it as a brass brush. But anyway, that will get rid of all of the inner bark and any other loose material that there might be. And it will also score the surface up to give the epoxy an area to bond to as well. All right, I already pin tested this on the ends, so I want to see underneath the bark here. This moisture meter is from Eric Hill. There's another one here. So I told him that I would try these and see what I thought. And you know, it's so low that it's not even reading. That's how dry this piece is. Yeah, nothing. But if you touch your fingers, I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up or not. There's the moisture content of me. 19. I'm pretty dry, actually. Anyway, I'm still using these, and I'm not going to give them my blessing until I've used it a little bit longer. But so far, so good. I'm happy with this. Pretty much fits perfectly. All right, lots of glue on the bottom of this piece and some there to hopefully hold this so it doesn't move. What we're going to do now is mix up some epoxy while this is curing up. And yeah, I mean, we're going to use a lot of it, but that's kind of the whole idea. Like I showed earlier, we're going to be using the Pro Series, the old Pro Series. And of course, this finish, or this epoxy, is designed for top coat finishes. That's the main thing for the Pro Series. So if you want to make kitchen countertops, this would be the epoxy that you would use. And it is not meant to be casted in this sense here. Red, purple, and blue Hypershift is what I want to put in this to give us some sparkle. I thought I'd empty the container because there wasn't a whole lot in there. Anyway, love my Hypershift, as you all know. All right, here's the first 1.5 liters. Bring you back when we got the next one done. Here's the second one. Put a little bit more of the Hypershift in this one. Well, I think that we're going to end up using this entire kit. So when it comes to epoxy, usually the shelf life on epoxy is 6 months to a year. So, you know, it's best to use it up before then. I'll give it one more for good measure. So that is basically almost a 3-gallon kit. There was a little bit gone out of it before I started this video, but yeah, that is a lot of resin. Oddly enough, it's not hot yet, but it's certainly going to get hot very quickly. So I'm going to put this in the pressure pot, and then I'm sure we'll see you tomorrow to fix all of the cracks that are going to happen with this, and let's hope that there's a lot. See you then. I've said it here a number of times that the resin is going to do whatever the resin wants to do. And this casting, first looking at it, proves my point. No thermal cracking. Say what? Yeah, no thermal cracking. Now that's not to say that there isn't more deep down inside of here. But at this stage, there's no thermal cracking. To give you an idea of depth, this is sitting at 9 inches deep. I do see that it's pulled away from the bucket here. I don't know if the camera's going to get that or not, but it's pulled away from the sidewall. So anyway, let's get this out and see if there's any thermal cracking. I'll be absolutely shocked if there isn't. But you just never know with the stuff. Oh, that's just wild. I don't see any thermal cracks in it. How crazy is that? Wow. I'm speechless. And it kind of totally throws my plan off. Oh man. I still think that, I don't know, there's got to be cracks inside of it. Wow. I mean, look at that Hypershift. How awesome is that? I love this top too. The way that looks, very cool. Anyway, I'm going to let this sit a day another day longer, and then we'll get at this. But you know, I thought for sure that I was going to pull this out and it was going to be just full of thermal cracks, but the epoxy is going to do what the epoxy is going to do. See you tomorrow. Just pointing out as I pinch this between centers that I did drill down and make recess for the live center and the drive center to sit in. That's pretty good. Starting off with the Hercules here from Hunter Tool Systems. Sorry about the lighting. The light coming through that window really kind of threw things off here. But anyway, don't worry, it won't be too much longer. So yeah, I mean, really, I was blown away when I pulled that out and there was no cracks in it. And it really threw a wrench into what I was going to do. So anyway, I couldn't take a hammer to it because it was a good solid piece. So I figured that we would finish this out and see exactly how it goes for us with this piece. Again, you know, at this stage, I'm still thinking deep down inside of the casting that there still has to be some sort of thermal cracking. There's got to be. You know, and a spoiler alert, we do find some thermal cracking, but it's, you know, it's very minimal, and it's in areas that, it's not in the large areas, it's in the smaller areas, which I find even more interesting. Anyway, I'm sure that there's some epoxy resin experts out there that will have an answer. It just really blew me away. Here I'm gathering up some shavings, and we'll use those again in a future project. So yeah, I know that the epoxy jugs were sitting on the floor, and of course the floor in my workshop this time of year is actually quite cold. So when I was mixing it, the resin was quite cold. I know that when you cast things in the pressure pot, that the pressure from the pressure pot can alter things as far as curing is concerned. The whole thing is a bit of a mystery, I must say. So anyway, if you've got any knowledge as to why this wouldn't have thermally cracked all to pieces, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And I will mention, I don't say this enough, but the reason why I want people to comment on my videos is, of course, it helps me in the algorithm. And of course, by commenting in the comment section, you'll automatically be entered into a draw, and I give away products every 5,000 subscribers. So this past week has been a crazy week for subscribers. So we're over 115,000 now. I actually got almost 600 subscribers in one night. So that, I haven't seen that since the very beginning of my channel when I first started it. So thank you for the new subscribers. And that means that we'll be doing a giveaway next week. And again, to keep away the people that do fraudulent acts on my channel during these giveaways, next week it will not be in the thumbnail, and it will not be in the description that goes, or the title that goes with the video either. And anyway, I will cover this again next week, but you know, we're just trying to, I don't want to see anybody get taken advantage of. So just remember that if you do win something from me, I ship worldwide at my expense. I will never ask you for any money if you're the winner of anything. And again, we'll also be doing a 3-gallon giveaway from Designer Epoxy next week as well. So now that we have the public service announcements out of the way, back to the piece on the lathe. All I'm doing at this point, like, I'm still thinking that there's going to be thermal cracks in this, like big ones, but I've got to expose them. So I'm just kind of truing this piece up, getting it down to where I've got some more wood coming through the piece, and then we'll make a call from there. But the number 3 Hercules is eating this stuff up like butter. And of course, if you want one of these, there's a link in the description to get 10% off your next order. Well, what do you think so far? the patterning through this epoxy is just, it's crazy. I absolutely love the look of it. It just, I don't know, all these streaks running down through it. So that tells me that that's going to be all the way through this casting. So, you know, let's hope that this thing survives and it's, we can get it polished up, because it is just going to look wild. All right, so, I was thinking initially, I'm going to bring this foot in a little bit further, shrink this up. The resin is sitting on top of this piece. There's how much resin sitting on the very top of this, but I can't remember if I'm going to hit any wood in the dead center at the top here. So I might just leave this as it is, and then as we swoop this in, we'll hopefully get rid of any witness line if there's a witness line up here. But again, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. A couple of options here is just round this off and kind of just do like a flat top, almost like this, if you will, with a hole. That might be the best way to showcase the patterns in this epoxy. I could make kind of like a fatter bottom and then come up in this kind of affair. That again might show off all this resin as well. I'm not sure. I'm gonna start taking this down, giving us a little better of a foot, and we're gonna put a glue block on this. So we'll do that, and then we'll figure that out from there. I know one thing, it's heavy. When I turn this on, my belt whines. It usually doesn't make that sound. So of course you won't get that if you dial the speed down and gradually bring it up. But this definitely is a heavy casting, that is for sure. I like to talk in these videos about the last week's video so I can address a few things. It went pretty much exactly the way that I thought it would go. You either really love this piece or you really don't care for it. And I know people are trying to be nice in the comments, but I get it. Most people probably didn't like it. I wouldn't say most, probably about half probably didn't care for it, and that's fine. That's what makes us all human. That's what makes us great. If we all like the same thing, it certainly would be a very boring existence, that's for sure. But I still have that piece. That piece still is available, and I got so wrapped up in trying to get this piece done that I actually haven't even corrected any of the issues from it from last week. So that'll be my main focus, to get on that this week and get it all ready to go. I am a little surprised it hasn't sold, but I know that there's somebody out there that absolutely loves this thing, and anyway, it's waiting for you. If you're still interested in getting it, it still is for sale. So the other thing that I quickly want to talk about as well is the Ocean Cave vase. That again has become a really popular video on my channel, and it's probably driving the majority of the traffic to my channel right now. And but lots of comments on, why didn't you use a vacuum chamber? Do you have a vacuum chamber? How come you didn't use your vacuum chamber? And of course I do have a vacuum chamber, and I've shown it here a number of times on my channel. I was worried about the resin starting to thermally set. So that was the main reason why I didn't use the vacuum chamber. I probably could have got away and used it briefly. In the end, would that have given us a different result? Possibly. Those bubbles that are in that vase that I actually like, they're there because the resin slowed down because it was cold, and it did not allow the bubbles to come to the surface like it ordinarily would. So, you know, that's where those bubbles came from. There were some comments about maybe I should have sealed the inside of the piece. I don't do that. Ordinarily, when I'm casting with deep cast, this is never an issue. But, the different factor was the fridge and how that kind of threw off the curing of it. So that's why those bubbles are there. And yes, in a perfect world, I would have used a vacuum chamber and, those bubbles wouldn't have been there. But like I said, I don't mind them being there. Not one bit. I should also mention that I'm turning a tenon here so that I can reverse this and hold it and then get a glue block on it. I would never turn a piece like this with just a pure resin tenon holding this. So, I've got tailstock support, which you should always do, especially on a piece that's heavy like this. And then, of course, I don't bother tooling it, like I said, without the tailstock in place because I was worried about it coming off the lathe. So I just ground down the little nub and then turned it on to give us a nice tooth for the hot melt glue that's been dipped in an electric frying pan to bond to. So once the glue is hardened up, here I'm using the 5/8 bowl gouge from David Ellsworth to trim this tenon back. You'll see me use the go, no-go gauge like I like to use, just a quick reference. The maximum size that my jaws will hold and the minimum size that my jaws will hold. There it is right there. And anyway, once I get this down to the size that I'm looking for, you'll see me use the parting tool just to crispen up that tenon so that, try and take as much movement out of the piece when it's reversed again. Yeah, I need to order a new parting tool out when they're starting to get a little short. I find after a while, I sharpen probably more than most. And I can burn through, when I was in normal production, I would burn through 2 Ellsworth gouges a year and at least 1 parting tool a year when I was in full production prior to COVID. So I really like my Ellsworth gouge, and I certainly do like the parting tool from Crown too. I should also mention that this little tenon that I've glued on here is actually all end grain, so that's why I didn't just kind of knock that little piece off. And again, just like the bottom of the casting, that it was ground to 60 grit, and it's not really that big of a concern because it's going inside of the chuck. But when it comes out of the chuck and sits on the bench, then of course you don't want it rocking around. So I usually will take that little nub away. But it's important to give the bottom of the casting a good tooth to bond for the hot melt glue to bond to. So that's why I typically sand it to 60 grit. It's funny, I got an email from a person here this past week, and they asked me like how dirty is it? How dusty is it? And can I do wood turning in my home in the basement? And my answer to that is, if you've got good dust collection and you've got maybe a window that you can mount a fan in to kind of pull the air out, which in Canada this time of year certainly is not really all that doable. But it is definitely dusty, and it does create a ton of mess. And it doesn't matter if you're working with resin or not. My workshop is 28 by 32, and so I've got about 6 feet of that missing where my clean room is. And on the other side of the room, I'll find resin shavings. That's how far they'll fly. So yes, it can be done in your home, but it definitely get ready for some dust because you're gonna have lots of it. Another common question that I get is how many hours are in this piece? And while I don't typically always film everything, when I usually do these voiceovers, everything is done except for the foot. So typically I'll go in, I'll do the voiceover in the morning, and then I'll head out to the workshop, shoot whatever I need to for the bottom of the piece that I'm working on, and then do the outro and all that other business. So when I first started editing this, there was 16 hours of footage to edit. So, I did cut a bunch of it out of here, and that's before shooting the foot and all of the other stuff involved with the vase. So, you know, or I should say the hollow form. So that gives you an idea of, as to how much time there is into something like this. When this is all said and done, I'll say probably 18 hours. That's probably going to be the amount of time that it took for me to create this piece. So these are very time-consuming things to make, and again, this is one of the reasons why they cost so much to buy. If you base a shop labor on, say, $80 an hour, which may seem high for some, but when you start talking insurance and paying for your power and maintenance costs and yourself, like $80 an hour isn't a lot of money. It really isn't. So, you know, the labor cost alone on this would be $1,440. And then, of course, you got material costs on top of that. And, you know, artistic expression, if you will. So that's why works like this are typically quite expensive to buy. But, you know, they are truly one-of-a-kind turnings, and there certainly will not be another one around like it. Every now and then you might see me point to an area here that's kind of white in color. And I just thought that this was another really odd thing about this piece, was that there seemed to be white pigment sitting on the sapwood on this piece. And it's just in the sapwood area. When I turn off, there it is right there. And you can see that it, underneath that ghosting, yeah, it goes further all the way along the sapwood. And I've never seen that before, and I don't know if the sapwood was reacting with the epoxy or the pigments or whatever it is. If you could somehow keep that, it would probably look good. But when you've only got portions of it, I figured it was probably best to get rid of it. Yeah, it just kept showing up, and I'm just like, wow, that's neat. Again, that's epoxy things. It really is. It's got a mind of its own. It's like, you're not in charge, I'm in charge. Answering a few more comments in regards to mold release and why I don't use mold release. And, you know, I've covered this a number of times on the channel. If you're not going to be gluing anything in place, then yes, mold release is certainly an option. If I'm just setting a weight on something and I'm not concerned about it moving around, then by all means I could use mold release, or even better, paste wax. Paste wax, I've found, is a much better release agent than the actual epoxy release agent. The issue is, if you're using paste wax or using mold release, well, you can't glue anything to it. And I know that you could clean off areas and try and do it that way, but I don't see the why risk that and then have your casting float when it goes into the pressure pot, and then you've got a failed casting. So that's why you won't see me typically use mold release or paste wax or anything like that. But, you know, I'm not against it. I'm just saying that for the way that I do the majority of my castings, I glue them in place, and using a release agent is not an option. All right, well, getting some progress. Believe it or not, it's taken me 4 hours to get to here. I do see a little bit of thermal cracking in these little void areas. This is going to be trimmed way further, so hopefully that's not going to be an issue. I do see some tiny little ones on the bottom here. Same sort of deal, just, I don't know why it would thermal crack inside of these and not this, but anyway, what I think I'm going to do is slip this off just a little bit more, and then I'm going to come in and kind of take out a fair chunk of this so that we've got kind of a flowing form. When the light hits this correctly, I mean, this nice purpley color, it's absolutely beautiful. Some pinks, purples. So the other thing too is when I reverse this after I put the glue block on it, I weighed it. And this sits at that time, 23 pounds, and that's 10.9 kilograms. That's how heavy this was. Basically, after I just had it trimmed away and had the glue block, just before the glue block went on the bottom. So with that said, if I had to guess, I'd say that this casting probably weighed 28 pounds. That would be 12.7 kilograms, somewhere around there, maybe 30 pounds. So yeah, I mean, something like this, it's important to make sure that it's not going to come off the lathe, because it could be very devastating if it does, just due to the weight of it. So, you know, that's why it's important to have those recesses for the live center and the drive center to sit in. You know, really, ideally on the very top of this piece. And again, I said that earlier that I wasn't sure where the wood was in there. On the bottom, I made sure to drill through till I hit wood, but on the top, I just figured I would do the recess on the top as it sat, because I just wasn't sure if I was going to hit wood or not. But I certainly could have gone a little deeper to find out if there was, but looking at the length of my live center, it doesn't look like I would have reached it anyway, unless I ground down a bunch of that epoxy that was sitting on the top. But at that time, I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it or not, so I didn't really want to grind it down. Now, pinching something like this between centers, there is some risk involved here. If the upper part where the collar is, if that were to break in that area, then yeah, that thing is probably going to come off the lathe. The safest way would be to mount a faceplate to the bottom of this and then put it on the lathe. But then you lose kind of control over exactly how you want things to be, and this is why I pinch things typically between centers, so that I can line things up the way that I want to. And this is really important when it comes to roughing out, so that, you know, your bowls are balanced. And anyway, if you're watching in my roughing out videos, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about as far as balance is concerned. Another thing that is commonly overlooked, and I do it myself, is, you know, really you shouldn't move the tool rest while the piece is spinning on the lathe. When it's rounded like this, it's not really such a big deal, but you know, if you're in the process of roughing something out, move the tool rest, make sure you spin the piece by hand. That way it's not going to hit the tool rest, or, you know, come around and hit your hand, which would be even worse, trust me. I'm also finding when working with epoxy pieces such as this, it wasn't an issue here, and I rarely show it, but I do constantly check to make sure that there's still good tension on the tailstock. If you're turning, say, epoxy that hasn't fully cured 100%, then what can happen when you first initially mount it between centers, the live center will sink into the epoxy, and you know, you think you've got it's you know, quite a bit of tension on it and seems to be securely mounted, but then you'll find a little later on that you can almost get maybe at least a half a turn on it. So keep an eye on that for people that are working with epoxy. The other thing that I will do quite regularly is check how much tension there is in the chuck. So I'll get the chuck key and make sure that nothing has loosened off a bit, because what happens is, especially if you're clamping down on end grain, it really probably depends on the piece that you're using, the ingrained piece, but the teeth will sink into it a little further, and then of course you can get maybe a little bit more of a bite on it, just to make sure that it's not going to come out of the chuck, because nobody wants that, that's for sure. This is another one of those zoomed out views. I don't think I've ever done a view like this to showcase how messy my shop is. Those the epoxy stringers, they've got, I've been getting shocked off my lathe. Here's some pom-pom action, and they've got some static in them, so of course then they want to cling to you and your face mask and and the back of your neck. So anyway, it's just one of those things you deal with when you're turning epoxy. But you know, you just, there's no other way to be creative like there is with epoxy. The colors, the different types of epoxies, what you can do with them, what you can't do with them. I really enjoy working with epoxy, and I didn't initially think that I was going to like it as much as I do, but I'm so glad that Designer Epoxy is sponsored my channel and allowed me to kind of explore the artistic side of wood turning more than just with straight wood. And don't get me wrong, like I still like working with just wooden pieces and the beauty that wood has in it. Well, some of it anyway. A lot of it can be just straight up boring, to be quite honest with you. And but anyway, this has really allowed me to work on the art side, and I'm really glad that I've got it in my inventory now. Especially even before I was using resin, even just having the UV resin to fill in areas when I was doing natural inlays would have been a huge bonus to me. But I get it. There's a lot of people that don't care for epoxy pieces, and but as far as I'm concerned, it has really brought the artistic side of wood turning out in me, and I just can't imagine moving forward and not being able to use epoxy in future pieces. So we're just going to take a few more passes here, and then we'll be able to set up the steady rest and drill out the center of this. Again, I would not even contemplate drilling this out unless it was being held by the steady rest. And that is mostly due to the fact of the weight of this piece. And that is the Phoenix, if you're curious. So it's been the Hercules all up to now. And that was the Phoenix right there, because I'm working on that little collar area. Starting off drilling with an 1.25 inch bit, and there I am collecting the shavings. And I will collect those shavings as long as there's no wood in them. I don't want any wood in those shavings if I'm going to recast them, just because the fact that I find it just makes the casting look dirty, so that's why you won't see me typically collect them. And then I switched out to a 2.5 inch bit, and again collected those shavings until they hit some wood inside, and then from there just carried on drilling this piece out. You'll also see me use a tailstock extender, since the travel on this tailstock isn't exactly the best, and you can get those at pretty much any wood turning supply. They usually will all have them. There, I'm finding I'm having trouble reaching the bottom, so here's the tailstock extender there. Seat that in, and then of course you got to seat the Jacob's chuck back into it, and then carry on drilling until you get to the very bottom of this piece. So I finally made the decision that I was going to get rid of this little collar. Having that really strong white area underneath of it just was really messing with me. If that wasn't there, then I might have kept it, to be quite honest with you, because it would kind of tie in the whole piece. But it just, to me, did not look good, and having that really strong white area underneath of it just wasn't working for me. We're all set up and ready for hollowing. This is the retrofit tool from Hunter Tool Systems. Link in the description. I'm using my captive system from oneway.ca, and it does have a laser, if you haven't seen this before. And right now it's set at about 1 inch. We'll close it up as we go. As far as taking the inside of the inside of this out, it was actually a lot easier than normal, and I believe that had a lot to do with the fact that I was just strictly working on an end grain piece, and these cutters from Hunter Tools work fantastic on end grain. So that's I think one of the reasons why it went as smoothly as it did. It still did present some challenges. I can see some small thermal cracking on the inside of this piece that probably in all likelihood lines up with the thermal cracks that were on the outside. But very, very minimal. Still very shocked over all of that. But you'll see me use the retrofit tool here. For a time, I think I'm using a teardrop cutter. I even tried the retrofit tool on the bent arm. We'll see that here in a little bit. Something that I hadn't tried before with mixed results. Anytime I'm using the bent arms that are smaller in diameter than this one, this boring bar is, which is 1 inch, I believe. You tend to get more vibration in it, but you have to use it on the upper part of these hollow forms because you just can't get that straight. The straight boring bar just won't do it. There, I'm actually, if I switch out, no, I'm still got the larger one on. And this panned out view will give you kind of a good sense of how the whole thing works. The top plate on the very top that holds the bar where the laser is, that's typically what I loosen off to move around. I don't really so much fool around with the adjustment where the laser is sitting, although you could if you just want a small adjustment. But any of the major adjustments will come on the plate on the very top. And but yeah, compared to some of the other ones that I've done recently, this was a lot easier to do, and I believe it's mostly because of the end grain. I cut the vast majority of the footage out of there. It's just a little hard to basically showcase and see inside the form, so I don't really see the point of having all this footage in there. That is the double bent arm, and while I really like this system, I do find that these bent arms, and you'll see me use the other one, tend to vibrate a lot more than that large, robust boring bar. So this is one of the things where I wish that these bars were the same size as the other boring bar. Watch me take this resin snake out of here. Look how long that is. I was like, this just kept going and going and going. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. There is the bent arm, and basically I thought that I would leave this in here to show you how I go about installing the arms on here and the adjustment. You'll see me loosen off the top plate that holds the laser's arm right there. And that way I'm just putting in my adjustment. That's where I do make all the major adjustments. You can use there's another adjustment. There's actually 2 more adjustment points where the laser is. But, I just typically use that for a really fine adjustment. Other than that, it's usually just that plate on the top. It's important to remove as many shavings as you can and do it regularly, because what can happen is the shavings will wrap around the tool, and then it'll pick it up and slam it down on the tool rest, and you risk damaging yourself and the piece you're working on and your equipment. So make sure you stop the lathe and remove the shavings regularly. Last bit of footage here before we move on to sanding. On this upper part where it's predominantly wood, it was really important to have a freshly sharpened cutter there. That way it was going to cut the piece clean. Started sanding the inside, just the top portion of this. I wasn't really so concerned about the other part of this phase. I just kind of wanted to sand the collar area up there, because I know that we are going to do a resin coat finish on the inside and the outside of this piece, one of them anyway. And there was some small little thermal cracks on the very bottom inside of this, so I didn't really even see the point of doing any sanding. It was relatively smooth on the inside. I was quite happy with it, but with the smaller open, it's a little hard to show that with the camera, so sorry about that. I didn't show it, but I did want to sand that down and make sure that it was good to go and there was no kind of lumps on the inside top. But again, very hard to get your hands in there and sand that. Just want to do some final little trimming here before we carry on with sanding. This piece did sit overnight and there was just very, very slight movement in it. So I'm basically trimming that up and truing it up again. And then once that's done, I also want to actually point out the fact that that mark that was on there was from the wheels. But this time around, it didn't score up the resin at all. So that tells me that, on the Ocean Cave vase, when we had that scoring where the wheels were, that probably is the fact because the resin wasn't fully cured at that point, and that's what caused those marks there. In all likelihood, probably from heat. But, this piece was in it. The Ocean Cave vase was set on a taper, where the wheels were on a taper, and the same thing with this piece, and it didn't happen on this piece. So that just goes to show you that this piece must have been, relatively fully cured prior to turning. Anyway, the piece was sanded from 60 to 180 on the outside in preparation for its epoxy coat that we're going to do. Love those 3.5-inch dipple discs from sandpaper.ca. But she sure is dusty. Power sanding is dusty. Okay, what I have here is 6 ounces of the Pro Series. Now you could use Art Cast here if you wished. I prefer to use the Pro Series because it's a 2-to-1 and it's thinner than the Art Cast. So that's the main reason why I want to use it in this regard. So any of those small little cracks, it's going to migrate down into those and fill them in. And then that way, hopefully we're going to get rid of any of these thermal cracks. And it actually does a really good job doing that. There was just a few the next day that we'll see coming up here and how I deal with them. But when that epoxy coat goes on this piece, man, does it ever bring that alive. That first coat of either whatever, it doesn't really matter what the first coat is, that old brown looking wood just pops, and it also, the hypershift just absolutely comes alive. Well, what do you think? I think it's absolutely cool. I'm a little surprised by how yellow this is. When I'm looking at it this way, lots of purples and blues. And then when I look at it this way, it's mostly purple. When I look at it straight on, it's blue. I'll bring the camera on the other side and show you. Still see some bubbles coming through. Be lots of them. This here looks like it's filled in decently. Might have to give it a little bit more. Yeah. Tried to steady my hand as best as I could while I was coming around here. Yeah, the camera isn't really picking up this hypershift as well as it is in person. But having those little purples and blues peeking through it is really cool. And the last thing that I want to do on this piece is just take the torch. You got to be really careful that you don't hold it on too long in some spots. But that'll help get rid of those bubbles. And no, I don't use a heat gun. I already see it starting to dry out there, so we got to add more epoxy. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Well, good morning. It is the next day, and surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of bubbles on this walnut. I let it rotate for another 10 or 15 minutes. And then I took it off and just set it in my clean room where the heat is overnight. For the most part, it's achieved my goals. Still see some little cracks there. I don't even know if the camera's gonna pick those up or not. I'm thinking what I'm gonna do is do another resin coat on the inside. And I'm not sure about the outside. I don't know if I'm gonna go with water lux or not. Might try and just do another resin coat, because it looks really nice. Anyway, we'll figure that out as we go here. So now I'm going to sand the inside of it, and that's a drill extension. You can get that anywhere that they sell wood turning supplies. This one here came from Princess Auto. I think I seen one in Canadian Tire when I was there last time I was in. So, you know, you can get them from a variety of sources, but any place that sells wood turning supplies certainly will have them. And of course, that little copper pipe is just so that I can steady my hand on there and not have it get burned. So I sanded the piece again, this time from 60 to 180 on the inside. And like I said, I'm going to do an epoxy finish on the inside after the coats of finish are done on the outside of this. That's mainly due to time constraints in getting this done and ready for upload on Friday. On the outside of this piece, I eventually sanded it to 800, but here I started it at 180. And I'm just grinding down any little epoxy runs there is. There was actually for putting it on and then just letting it sit, there was actually very few. And anyway, well, I didn't want to go any higher than that because I still have those small little thermal cracks to deal with on the top side of that vase. And we'll tackle them right now. Just a couple of small little cracks here. So I figure that, you know, the thin CA glue from Starbond is probably the best choice here. That way I can get deep down inside of there. And of course I'll set it with the accelerator. The UV resin wasn't really an option here, and the reason for that is because those cracks kind of went in and kind of went to one side. So I figured that the water thin CA glue was the way to go, and sure enough, I didn't have to do another application of it. It filled in the rest of those little cracks. It's where you can't even hardly even see them. So after 10 minutes, put it back on the lathe, ground down any of the high spots where the CA glue was. And then after that, turn the lathe on and blend it all in and then carry on sanding to 800 like I said earlier. On to buffing. This is the Triple E buffing compound, and this will be the last step. Well, second last step. We got to clean it off with some denatured alcohol. But of course, the reason why I do this is to just get rid of any fine little scratches prior to any top coat finish going on. This step is not necessary when it comes to doing epoxy. There's the denatured alcohol. And that'll give you an idea of how much dirt you're going to take off, or buffing compound in this case. All right, this is the first coat of Waterlux Gloss. Well, there it is. Man, I love that color. Hyper Shift is amazing. Really nice contrast with that black walnuts. This thing's so heavy with the chuck, it's hard to move around, but different colors throughout it. Really, really cool looking piece. I will do another resin coat on the inside of this, and then the inside will be done. So the deal is right now, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I plan on two coating this today. If it needs it, it probably will. And I'll have to do the resin coat tomorrow. Today is Wednesday, so today's the last day to try and get at least the outside of this done so we can show it off properly. Man, this thing is so cool. Let me know in the comments what you think. So I was able to actually get another coat of finish on this later on in the evening. So this is the next day, and I'm just going to get rid of this waste block on the very bottom. I'm just using the Ellsworth gouge to do that, and the majority of the glue that's in behind that as well. I do find that glue will kind of clog up the Hercules. So once that's done, I'm going to switch out to the Hercules here. This actually took a long time to do the bottom here, so I cut a lot of this footage out. Once that was done, I initially started sanding with 60 grit, and then when I turned the lathe off, I noticed that there was a couple of little thermal cracks that needed to be repaired. So took it off the vacuum chuck, used the thin CA glue again, and trimmed it back and sanded it from 60 to 320. I'd like to personally thank all the people that have watched the entire video. Thank you so much. And I'll remind you that, if you go to my channel, there is I have all different playlists of hollow forms, natural inlaid bowls, natural wood bowls, you name it. It's all kind of broken down. Even tractor videos, which I plan on putting up another tractor video this week. So stay tuned for that. Let's have a last little chat about this piece. Well, there, you get some hyper shift action happening there. Very, very cool. Of course, the top. And I know there's going to be some comments about there's not enough wood in this piece. I know. Ideally, there would be more. On the very bottom, I decided to engrave it with a snack over there. Decided to engrave it. So that's what that looks like. Couple small little micro cracks on the bottom of this too, and some punkiness. So that's what the thin CA glue was for. Overall, the size on this is 10 inches across. It's a little hard to measure, but I think it's 10 inches across at its widest point, 7.5 inches tall. And this is actually pretty heavy in the base. Believe it or not, so we went from 23 pounds to 7.7 pounds, and that's 10.9 kilograms down to 3.5 kilograms. My laser died, and I didn't think that this was that thick on the bottom. Regardless, it's very stable on the table, and it is not going to go anywhere even if it's bumped, so that's good. The yellowing. The yellowing has got to come from the epoxy. Ordinarily, I'm not a huge fan of the yellowing, but with this piece, it's not so bad. But I don't think that yellowing came from the wood at all. I think that it's actually in the epoxy. And this is one of the reasons why you need to use up your epoxy before it goes bad. Cool, cool hypershift. Set this down. I should mention that piece is for sale. If you're interested, send me an email to spraguewoodturning@gmail.com. I still got some stuff to do with it, so it's not going to be ready to go right away, but it will be ready to go here hopefully in a few days, along with the jellyfish vase, that too. Don't forget to put designer epoxy in the comments down below. This will be the last draw before the 3-gallon giveaway next week, so just put designer epoxy, 2 words, in the comments down below to be entered into that draw. And of course, that's only for continental USA and Canada, so the rest of the world can't accommodate you at this time. Next week will also be the giveaway. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I haven't even started on it. So, but anyway, that will be the 115,000 subscriber giveaway. So please come on back for that. The voiceovers are not going anywhere. I know there's a lot of people that want me to give up the voiceovers to the point of telling me to shut up in the comments, but I'm not going anywhere, and neither is my voiceover. So anyway, that's just the way it's going to be. I know that a lot of people get a lot of valuable knowledge in my videos. I think it's valuable knowledge anyway. So I can't really do that unless I'm talking over the videos. So that's just the way it's going to be. All right, well, that's it. Take care, stay safe. Don't forget the bell. Please share my videos with your friends. That is the largest way for me to build my presence here on YouTube, is for you guys sharing my videos with your friends. All right, well, that's it. We'll see you next week.